Have you ever wondered how a family feud sparked one of the biggest rivalries in sports history? What if I told you that the battle between Adidas and Puma all started with a sibling argument? In this video, we dive into the fascinating story behind how this family rivalry led to the birth of modern sports marketing. From humble beginnings to global dominance, we'll explore how Adidas and Puma changed the way the world views sports branding. The infamous rivalry that existed between the two brothers continued till the end of time. Each of the brothers made a request before to their passing that their graves be kept distinct from one another, and more particularly, that they be buried as far apart as possible. It was in compliance with that intention that they were laid to rest at opposing ends of the Herzogenaurach cemetery. The Dassler brothers, Rudolf and Adolf, call the town of Herzogenaurach, which is located on the banks of the Arach River in the German state of Bavaria, their hometown. After years of working together, the two brothers decided to separate and establish two own shoe companies in the late 1940s. This decision was made following the escalation of hostilities between them. Puma and Adidas, two of the most well-known shoe brands in the world, were both developed out of this competition. During their time in the athletic goods industry, these two companies would go on to become legendary titans. The birth of the younger brother Adolf occurred in the year 1900, 2 years after the birth of the older brother Rudolf, who was born in the year 1898. Adi was the nickname that Adolf was commonly known by among his family and friends. Business Standard, in French, news from Google. For up-to-date information, subscribe to the Google News channel for the Business Standard. As a result of the fact that Christoph Dassler, the father, worked at a shoe factory, there was a lot of conjecture that the two brothers were motivated to enter the shoe business by their father. On the other hand, Christoph desired for Rudolf to become a police officer and for Adi to pursue a career in baking. However, Adi had a different dream in mind. In the past, he used to take part in a variety of sports because he had the desire to become an athlete. When he went through that experience, he realized that there were no shoes that were appropriate for players to wear in any sport. Adi was of the opinion that if a specific kind of shoe could be manufactured by a company specifically for a particular sport, then the performance of the players would improve. However, before he could pursue this dream, the First World War broke out, and he was dispatched to fight in Europe after entering the military. He was unable to pursue this achievement. Immediately following his return from the war, Adi established a little shoe factory in the bathtub of his mother's house. After receiving assistance from Carl Jake, an experienced shoemaker, he began producing athletic footwear and sandals at his little factory not long after that. As a result of the severe economic slump that Germany endured after the war, it became impossible for the country to acquire the raw materials that were required for the production of shoes. It was for this reason that he began gathering abandoned military equipment from all across the war-torn surrounding region. He began manufacturing slippers out of the fabric of abandoned parachutes and shoes out of the skins of discarded water bags and army helmets. He also began employing the skins of discarded water bags. The insufficient quantity of raw materials was not the only obstacle he faced. A shortage of electricity supply was another obstacle that hindered his capacity to operate the machinery he used to make shoes. The solution that he came up with to this problem was to tie the leather milling machine to a bicycle that had a dynamo attached to it. For a number of years, he relied on this to power his enterprise. After 2 years, Rudolf became a part of Adi's shoemaking firm, and the two of them eventually established a business that they named Gebruder Dassler Schuhfabrik. Rudolf was in charge of sales, marketing, and promotions, while Adi, who was the more creative of the two, was responsible for the technical parts of shoe manufacture. During the year 1925, the Dassler brothers began manufacturing football boots that were manufactured from leather. Nail studs and spikes, which were a relatively new idea at the time, were attached to the bottom of these boots. Track shoes with spikes were also included. They produced up to 50 pairs of shoes every single day, despite having just a dozen people working for them. It was at the 1928 Olympic Games in Amsterdam that they earned their first significant triumph. Lena Radke, who was competing in Dassler's firm shoes, won the gold medal in the women's 800-meter race. A record-breaking victory by Lena Radke demonstrated that Adi's theory, which states that you can run faster and perform better in shoes manufactured by them, is correct. The Gebrüder Dassler shoe fabric, which was the shoe manufacturer owned by the Dassler brothers, became the preferred footwear of athletes competing in the Munich and Los Angeles Olympic Games in 1932 and 1936, respectively. Track and field superstar Jesse Owens of the United States of America won all 4 gold medals at the 1936 Olympics while wearing Dassler's shoes. The partnership between Owens and Dassler's shoes turned out to be extremely beneficial to the growth of the company. Dassler's company became an international institution in the world of sports as a result of Owens's victory, and their sales increased as a result of this. At the beginning of World War II, Rudolf enlisted in the military, while Adi continued to handle the business at the time. As a result of the conflict, there was once again a significant shortage of raw materials, particularly leather. Gebrüder Dassler Schuhfabrik continued to manufacture footwear for players in spite of the catastrophe that was occurring. By 1943, they were the only company in Germany that manufactured athletic footwear. However, during the last 2 years of the war, the factories were forced to make weapons against their will, and they were forced to close their doors. Following the conclusion of the battle, the two brothers started to have disagreements with one another. Despite the fact that the two brothers shared a house with their wives and children, tensions began to arise not only between the brothers, but also between their wives. During the war, it is said that Adi and his family took cover in a bomb shelter during a bomb attack. This, according to legend, occurred on a certain day. Rudolf and his family had already taken cover in the bomb shelter when the bomb went off. As Adi entered the bomb bunker, he remarked, "The dirty bastards are back." He was referring to the fighter jets that were used by the enemy. Rudolf, on the other hand, was under the impression that his brother's statements were directed for him and his family. In addition, the assets of the Gebrüder Dassler Schuhfabrik company were divided between the two brothers after they entered into a divorce. Shortly after that, Adi set up a company called Adidas, and he proceeded to manufacture footwear under this new name. On the other hand, Rudolf relocated his company to the location on the opposite side of the river. There, he established a business that was initially known as Ruda, but was subsequently rebranded as Puma. Additionally, the family and the city were split into two distinct halves. While some employees went to work for Adidas, others chose to work for Puma, but the two companies formed a fierce and long-lasting competition with one another. Due to the fact that both sides of the river have declared their support for their respective firms, any fan of Adidas who was wearing Adidas shoes would be considered undesirable on the Puma side of the river. Because of the extent of this separation, in the end, both sides would have their very own sports club, bar, and bakery within their own premises. The disagreement that occurred between the two brothers was exploited by a great number of people. For instance, there were times when workers at Rudolf's factory would show up to work wearing shoes manufactured by Adidas. Rudolf would become enraged when he saw this, and he would request that they fetch Puma shoes from the basement of his workshop and wear them. They might be able to obtain these sneakers at no cost. Horst Dassler, Adolf Dassler's son, became the purchaser of Adidas in 1987. Bernard Tapie, a French industrialist, was the buyer. On the other hand, Rudolf Dassler's sons Armin and Jared Dassler sold 72% of the shares of Puma to the Swiss company Kosa Liebermann. Following the two companies' listing on the stock market, the ownership of the two businesses is no longer held by two families independently of one another. There has also been a diversification of the workforce. The majority of employees of both companies now come from outside the city, and the few people in the city who are still employed by the two enterprises are not as competitive as they were in the past. Despite the fact that employees of the two companies do, in fact, comment on each other's clothing when they meet on the street, this phenomenon is now done solely for the sake of amusement. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the world of sports history and marketing. Join the conversation and stay tuned for more amazing stories.